Outside the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte is best known for his violent war on drugs.
I'm just saying, if you create a problem for us, I will take you off.
Thousands of drug suspects have been killed by police and vigilantes. Now, 2 years after being elected, critics say Duterte's administration is attacking the very institutions designed to keep his power in check and locking up those who criticize him.
Senator, are you innocent?
Oh yes, I am innocent.
You attack the media, the judiciary, the legislature, you harass those opposing you, and you try to hold on to power beyond your term.
I've been covering the Philippines for more than a year, and little surprises me. Even the children of infamous dictator Ferdinand Marcos are emerging as powerful players in their own right.
Do you see similarities between President Duterte and your father?
Not at all. You're asking the wrong person. Thank you.
As the president's grip on power tightens, are we witnessing a return to the politics of dictatorship? Nighttime in Tondo, a district with one of the highest crime rates in the Philippine capital. There's a curfew here. If you're under 18, you need to be off the streets by 10 o'clock. We're riding with police officers here in Tondo, Manila. What they're looking for is anti-social behavior, tambays or loiterers. In the last month, we've seen thousands of people apprehended for drinking in the streets, smoking in public, or walking around without t-shirts on. In this crowded city, where many live in small, stuffy shacks, it's normal for people to socialize in the street. But now Duterte is determined to eradicate what he calls loitering. The Philippines is infamous for its full-to-bursting jails. With the president's crackdown on antisocial behavior, this situation is getting much worse.
Pag mag-standby na sa inyo, umuwi kayo. Kaya pag hindi kayo umuwi, ako nang bahala, ilagay mo lang dyan. Talian yung kamay pati, ihulog ko yan dyan sa...
Outside, a van arrives, seemingly full of children. But the police are not as keen for us to film them. Manila is the world's most densely populated city. 21 million people crowd in here, and life at the bottom is pretty tough. The district of Tondo is where many new arrivals to the city go. But it's hard to move on from here. It's become the most populous area of the Philippine capital. It's squalid, drenched in poverty, and at the sharp end of the president's more draconian policies. Ricardo and Russell live beside a heavily polluted river. They are both unemployed, and seemingly basketball is their only escape.
Kahit ano, walang kasalanan, pumapatay sila.
Masyadong mahigpit ang bansa natin eh. Hindi na lang iparaya ng presidente kung ano meron tayo ngayon.
Siguro, di alam ni Duterte yung ano, yun, wala naman kaming hanap buhay. Mahirap lang kami.
Yan, ang namatay, 10,000. What the hell? Para sa akin, dagdagan mo. Make it 50,000.
When it comes to authoritarian leaders, this is a country with a rich pedigree.
Ferdinand E. Marcos is the only Filipino to be twice elected president. He's now overstayed his second term of office by more than a year and shows no inclination to step down. In the 1970s, the Philippines fell into the clutches of a notorious dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, who declared martial law.
The president today exhorted members of the judiciary to expedite action.
He muzzled the media, closed down political opposition, and took control of the judicial process. He and his wife Imelda plundered the country's coffers to the tune of $10 billion and set the benchmark high for corruption. Imelda became a byword for greed, exemplified by her vast collection of designer shoes and dresses. Eventually, the Marcos family fled the country in 1986. Now, some critics believe that history is in danger of repeating itself.
Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now, there is 3 million, there's a 3 million drug addicts. I'd be happy to slaughter them.
President Duterte came to power promising to root out the country's big social problem, drugs.
Either you kill me or I will kill you, idiots.
Much of my job has been reporting on the fallout from this policy. In the last 2 years, the president's war on drugs has seen at least 4,000 suspected drug users and dealers killed during police operations. It's not just the war on drugs, but also the attacks on the Constitution, which many fear threaten democracy here. The president's biggest critic is a long-standing political opponent, Senator Leila de Lima. As chairperson on the Commission on Human Rights, de Lima investigated an earlier killing spree. Before becoming president, Duterte was accused of controlling a death squad in the provincial city of Davao, where he was mayor, responsible for more than 1,000 deaths or disappearances. In February 2017, the Department of Justice detained de Lima following corruption allegations by the president. Many believe they are trumped-up charges. I attended her recent trial. Senator, BBC, are you innocent?
I am innocent. The world knows that I'm innocent. Being persecuted.
For now, Senator de Lima is being held in a detention cell in the National Police Headquarters, infamous under the Marcos regime for disappearances and torture. As a foreign journalist, I'm not allowed to interview Senator Leila de Lima inside her detention cell. Instead, I've sent questions to her special advisor, and she has responded by writing 21 pages of handwritten letters. In them, she details what life is like inside the detention cell, and also why she believes that President Rodrigo Duterte is bullying politicians.
Being corrupt is not in my DNA. And no amount of lies or black propaganda can change the fact that I am innocent. Duterte ran a death squad, the so-called Davao Death Squad, responsible for the murder of at least 1,200 individuals. Once this criminal gangster from the backwater of the Philippines captured the popular imagination, he transformed the Philippine state into a gangster state.
Senator Sonny Trillanes is a staunch defender of the imprisoned Senator de Lima. He's also a thorn in the side of the Duterte family. He led a recent inquiry into allegations that the president's son was involved in a drug deal worth $125 million. Paulo Duterte denied the accusation and issued a chilling warning.
Every dog has his day. The law of karma will operate especially to those with evil intent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
How do you assess the current health of democracy in the Philippines under President Rodrigo Duterte?
Well, it's going to flatline at any moment. Duterte decides to declare a nationwide martial law or a revolutionary government.
Do you think that's likely?
Given the opportunity, he would pull that trigger. So we, the members of the opposition, are preparing for such an eventuality.
But he said he wouldn't want to stay in office a day longer than he's democratically elected to be in office for.
Well, those of us who have profiled Mr. Duterte would not give him that benefit of the doubt or take his word.
Another stern critic of Duterte is the country's top judge, Chief Justice Maria Sereno. In May, she too was unceremoniously removed from office. She believes the Duterte administration is now threatening the very independence of the judiciary.
It does not like criticism. It shows viciousness against groups of people that it deems are its critics. And it tries to show that the strong arm of the presidency is not beyond being used to oppress people. I think that is precisely the impression that this administration wanted, that you cannot cross him. And if you cross him, you're going to pay a high price for it.
Either sumama ka sa akin ng buhay, putang ina ka, o papatayin kita, talhing kita, either sa istasyon o sa punerarya, mamili ka. Ganon.
Inside the Congress building on the day of his recent State of the Nation speech, no one is disagreeing with Mr. Duterte. Harry Roque is the president's spin doctor. Once a darling of the left and a celebrated human rights activist, he's adamant that there's no creep towards dictatorship.
Some of your colleagues were shocked when you started working with President Duterte because of his on-the-record disregard for human rights.
Well, he doesn't support the organized human rights community, but he has actually been exculpated from claims of mass murders by no less than the UN Special Rapporteur Philip Alston, and investigated the case of the Davao Death Squad. It was clear there that he was completely cleared of liability. At most, there was administrative lapses, perhaps, but it was clear from the Alston report that he was not behind the Davao Death Squad. And despite this, people persist in accusing him of being behind now the drug-related killings.
This is an interesting interpretation of the United Nations report into the Davao Death Squad. I wrote to the UN Special Rapporteur Philip Alston to see if he agreed with Mr. Roque's statement that the president had been completely cleared of liability.
Paragraphs 39 to 43 of the attached report clearly implicate Duterte in the killings perpetrated by the Davao Death Squad.
Duterte is taking no chances with other international bodies. In March, he unilaterally withdrew the Philippines from the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. But the Duterte government's attacks are not limited to political or judicial opponents. The media is also in its sights. The Rappler News website was started in 2012. It's staffed by ambitious millennials keen to expose human rights abuses. In January, the government revoked the company's media license, claiming it was unconstitutional because it has foreign investors.
The charges are incredible, and they're false. Foreign ownership. I mean, we wanted to be independent, because if you get a Filipino investor, there's political pressure, they can cave in much sooner, right? We haven't caved in, because we're journalists.
The legal charges against the company were one matter. More disturbing were the threats on the internet.
90 hate messages per hour. When you get that many things, you have to sit and figure out, is it real? Where is it coming from? Rape threats are normal, death threats are normal. I've been called every single animal you can think of. This is meant to bludgeon you into silence. And what I've learned in the last year is the only defense you really have is to shine the light. So we've gone ahead.
And you bleed for those son of a bitch?
Ilan? 3,000? I will kill more. If only to get rid of drugs.
Pia Renada cut her teeth at Rappler covering Duterte's presidential campaign in 2016. She got a unique insight into the would-be president.
He was a very different kind of politician. He was the type who would swear. He had this reputation of being, a killer, and someone who flouts the usual mold of a politician. So he was also very charming in his own way. He had his way with reporters, with media, with people around him. He was very charismatic.
But the relationship turned sour when Pia wrote a critical article alleging corruption within Duterte's administration. She's now barred from covering the president.
My wings are clipped. I'm very limited in my movement. Also, my family is very worried about me because they see all of these threats online and offline. I get emails with death threats and rape threats. So it's definitely not been easy.
Order bago ni Mayor. Di lang daw mo pat yun. Pusilon mo bisong. Wala na bisong, wala na may silbi.
Although the majority of the population seem to approve of the president's strong-arm tactics, you can still easily find those who openly criticize him. At the Manila Gay Pride event, the punk group Male Gays are not afraid to speak out.
He makes these really misogynistic comments on a very regular basis. And what we want to do is we want people to realize that this is not something that can be normalized.
The president right now is obviously trying to manipulate the judiciary and the legislative bodies to bend to his will. So I don't know if you could call that a democracy.
Across town, there's an altogether different song being sung. At a party fundraiser, the president's supporters are charmed by his karaoke performance. And across the country, one recent opinion poll has his approval rating as high as 88%.
Thank you, President.
Many are drawn to his tough-talking, zero-tolerance style. It's not only the president who is keen to hit the right notes. Perhaps it's coincidence, but in the Philippines today, the Marcos brand is undergoing a rehabilitation. The daughter of the man who stole $10 billion from the public purse and who shares her mother's famous love of designer shoes is keen to remind the police force that a strong leader really is best for the country.
Political freedoms indeed have their place in the sun, and they are enshrined in our Constitution. Yet we must remember that there are other freedoms, freedoms from fear, freedom from oppression, freedom from abuse, and freedom from lawlessness.
It all sounds reminiscent of another period in the Philippines' history, when political freedoms were also deemed a luxury.
President Marcos backed his warning by sending Marine units towards the camp where the military faction backing the opposition is holed up.
Under Jaime Marcos's father, martial law was imposed on the country for a decade. There were widespread claims of human rights abuses, including torture and extrajudicial killing.
Governor Howard Johnson, BBC News. It's coming up to 2 years of President Duterte's rule. Do you see similarities between him and your father?
Not really.
And why is that?
They're both lawyers, that's about it.
And do you think that they have a same style of rule, that there's some sort of punitive moves that have been taken under President Duterte and under your father?
Not at all. You're asking the wrong person. Thank you.
Well, if the daughter of the famous dictator isn't the right person to ask, how about the son? Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known as Bongbong, is every bit as ambitious as his sister. He's currently jockeying to become the country's vice president. If you return to power, would you rule the country in the same way as your father?
Would I
rule the country in the same way as your father?
I don't. I think we're a bit ahead of ourselves here. I'm protesting. I'm talking about the protest for the vice presidential election. I really haven't thought of it.
Okay, thank you so much. Just if you were elected as vice president, what would your style be? Would it be similar to your father?
My father was never vice president. Every time, every period in our history calls for different sort of leadership. And that leadership is only defined by the circumstances that prevail at the time. So until we get there, it's impossible to say.
The extent of Bongbong's ambition remains unclear. But in the past month, President Duterte has publicly tipped him as a potential successor. Critics say that this is harking back to an era of martial law under dictator Ferdinand Marcos. We're seeing, attacks on the media, the judiciary, and also politicians. Is that a fair comment?
No, terribly unfair.
Is democracy in danger?
Of course not. Everyone recognizes that he has a popular mandate. He had a lead of 5 million votes. Is he a dictator? How could he be a dictator? He was constitutionally elected, democratically elected. Whether or not you like him, he stays there until 2022.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Republic of the Philippines, President Rodrigo Roa Duterte.
Duterte's grip on power looks secure. Despite his brutal war on drugs and the stifling of opposition, the majority of the country still supports him.
Whether you kill me or I do not give about for criticism after all. Do not make country trouble.
Since we interviewed Senator Trillanes, President Duterte has ordered his arrest.
In just one presidential proclamation, he demonstrated his executive, legislative, and judicial powers. So that's a dictatorship, no matter how you look at it.
The president's rule is increasingly authoritarian. With 4 more years in power, the future for democracy here is looking bleak.